What's up, you guys? It's Simon with Simon Says Finance, where on my channel I hope to share with you my 2 cents on some key financial topics that I believe are going to make you more confident and knowledgeable in handling your own personal finances. Yeah! So for today's video, we're going to discuss the top 5 money traps to avoid in your 30s. And if you're new to this channel, make sure to check out my previous video of top 5 money traps to avoid in your 20s. Before this video, a lot of people like to think that your 20s are actually the best years of your life. But I like to think that your 30s are going to be better than your 20s because you still have a lot of the same energy that you had when you were 20. Except this time you have a lot more money in your 30s as compared to your 20s, so you're more than likely able to carry out a lot of the ambitions that you wanted to do that normally you wouldn't be able to afford. And if you watch my past videos of money traps to avoid in your 20s, more than likely you're in a much better financial state today in your 30s as compared to what you were in your 20s. But like any good video game, although you may have mastered one level, there's always another level with different challenges that may take you by surprise. So this video is going to be like a playbook for you going into your 30s so that you can avoid many of the money traps that many of us Americans fall into. Now, what makes your 30s different than your 20s is usually in this chapter of your life, many of us start growing our own family. Usually in this stage, we start to settle down and buy our first home. And we usually are a little wiser from all the lessons we learn in our 20s. And this is usually the part in our lives where we start making a little bit more money because we start moving up in our career. And as you can see from this graph, this is true for most Americans where there is a large income increase throughout your 30s. But just like a wise philosopher once said, more money, more problems. So if anyone you get any kind of value from this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for the YouTube algorithm and share this video with someone that you know that's also in their 30s so they can avoid these money traps. And just as a quick disclaimer,
I'm not a certified financial advisor. I'm just some guy on YouTube talking about financial topics, and it's up to you to determine what's best for your own personal finances.
So without further ado,
let's get ready to rumble!
So money trap number 1 to avoid is keeping up with the Joneses. Now this is a money trap that I'm sure many of us have heard, but I think it's still important to reiterate because this is still one of the most common money traps that many of us in our 30s fall into. Because let's face it, we all want the nice house, the nice car, the Gucci slippers, and all the best food. But we have to realize that unless you're Elon Musk, there will always be someone that has more money than you. And just as Theodore Roosevelt once said, comparison is a thief of joy. It's not fair for yourself when you're in your 30s to compare your financial situation to your neighbor that may be in his 50s. Or say your neighbor is the same age as you. It's not fair for you to compare your financial situation if you have 5 kids as compared to his that may have no kids. So it's not fair for us to stretch ourselves financially just so we can keep up with the cool kids down the block. It's okay if you order the dinner special when your friend orders the most expensive thing on the menu with a bottle of wine. It's okay to have the used Honda when your neighbor has the new Maserati. And it's okay to be crocking out in your front yard when your neighbor has the newest Gucci slippers. Because for all you know, you might be in a better financial situation as compared to your neighbor because your Honda and your Crocs are paid off. Meanwhile, his Maserati could be 3 months behind on a 7-year loan at 29% interest. And his Gucci slippers could be being paid off on a credit card month to month. But on the surface, it looks like they are winning, but in reality, you are in fact the one that's winning. Because success may not always be in line with what you see on the outside. And from a recent survey conducted by Lending Club, more than likely this is the case because they found that over 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And that 48% of those that are making $100,000 a year are also living paycheck to paycheck. In other words, if you include your own household and you have a neighbor to your right and a neighbor to your left, based on this statistic, 2 out of the 3 of you are living paycheck to paycheck. And if you happen to not be living paycheck to paycheck yourself, then that means statistically that both of your neighbors are actually living paycheck to paycheck. So think about that. And if you know you're on track to meet your own financial goals, you'll be doing yourself a disservice trying to impress your neighbor by buying all the newest stuff. Because like I said, if they're living paycheck to paycheck, they're just one job loss away from losing everything. Meanwhile, you may have built yourself a strong financial foundation made of bricks from all the savings and investments you made, while their financial situation may resemble more of a house of cards where if anything goes wrong, they lose everything. And I'm all for owning the Maserati or the nicest car, but it's whenever you're ready for it financially so that the car is not such a big chunk of your net worth. And like I mentioned before in my past videos, a good rule of thumb for knowing if you can afford a car without severely impacting your financial state is to buy a car that when financed for 4 years max, the monthly payment is no more than 10% of your monthly income to include fuel. So if you make $5,000 a month, the car payment with all the expenses associated with it should not be more than $500 a month. As for miscellaneous purchases, another rule of thumb that you can use to determine if you can afford something is to ask yourself, can I buy this item twice today in cash without feeling any financial stress? If you can, then it's probably a sign that you should reconsider the fact that if you can afford it. A funny example of a time I used this rule was back when I was a broke college kid. I remember going to Chipotle to order a burrito, and the employees always ask if you want to add guac because it's an extra $2 to $3. Now at the time I was making so little money that I had to really think hard if I really wanted the guac or not. And I remember telling my college friend at the time that one of my first financial goals in life was to be able to make enough money that when I'm asked if I want to walk or not, that I can say yes without even thinking about it. And sure enough, a few years went by, and after I kind of forgot about the whole situation, I went to Chipotle and ordered my normal thing and got guac, got through the line and the register, sat down and opened the foil on my burrito, and just when I was about to take my first bite, I realized I didn't even have to question myself if I could afford the guac or not. And I remember I sat there for a second thinking to myself, man, I made it. And I remember that burrito tasted just a little bit better that day. And I don't know if it was because of the guac or because I was in a much better financial situation. And I know that's kind of a funny story that at one point in my life I really had to consider if I could afford the guac on my burrito. But that same rule of making sure that I could buy something twice without question really helped me to stay on track during those hard guacless years. And it's a rule that I still use today to make sure that I keep my finances in track so I don't fall into the trap of keeping up with the Joneses. So all in all, just like our parents would tell us to act our age when we got out of line as a kid, in order to not fall into the money trap as an adult, it's important to act our wage. So for money trap number 2 to avoid is becoming house rich and life poor. Now most would consider buying a big home for yourself a good thing, and for the most part I would agree with that. It's a way for us to start growing our net worth by having money put towards principal, it has tax advantages, and it's a hedge on inflation. However, when the monthly payment starts to get so high that it starts to affect your quality of life, this nice big house with all the extra bedrooms can quickly start to become a curse. And since this is usually the chapter in your life where you start to grow your family, there's this added pressure to buy a bigger and bigger home. And if you add in the keeping up with the Joneses effect, you can see how you can easily be pressured to buy the biggest house that the bank will allow. And just because the bank says you can afford the monthly payment doesn't mean that your mental health, your stress, and your lifestyle can afford it without being affected in the process. One of the key ways that a bank determines the maximum loan that you can be approved for is using what's called the debt to income ratio, where it takes all the monthly payments from all the debts that you currently have to include the anticipated monthly payment from the house. Then you divide that number from your monthly taxable income and it gives you a percentage. What this percentage tells the bank is that, hey, when you have the monthly payment of the house plus all the debt that you owe each month, how big is that compared to the income you make every month? Because the bank is not dumb. They want to make sure you have some money left over after you pay your utilities, your bills, and any unforeseen circumstances so you don't default on the loan. And that magical number that most banks stick to is around 43% for your debt to income ratio. Now to put that into perspective, let's say you make $4,000 a month. If you had no other debt at the time that you got approved for the loan, that would mean that the bank would allow you to buy a house that would cost $1,720 a month. And let's say you bought a home using the maximum loan amount that you were approved for. At first you may feel awesome because you're able to buy a house bigger than what you thought you could with a pool and all the Gucci features. Now let's assume your utilities cost you $500 a month. And take the average cost of health insurance per person is about $500 a month. And add another $500 a month in food because you decided to cook all your own food. That leaves your total bills of all the necessities, food, water, and shelter being $3,220 a month, which leaves you with just $780 a month for fun, investments, and emergencies. And with inflation going up each year, it's more than likely going to be less than that. And also notice that we didn't even include a car payment or fuel. So more than likely, if you maxed out your purchasing power on your home loan, you would more than likely be barely making it each month and have nothing left over for fun, let alone a car payment. With having so little amount left over, the main thing that's going to start affecting is your peace of mind. You'll start having worries doing everyday things about paying your bills, about getting laid off, or about the bank potentially foreclosing on your house and forcing your family out on the streets. And it will make it extremely difficult to save up a good emergency fund because there's going to be so little left over at the end of each month. Not to mention you probably will not be able to invest in your retirement accounts, which will affect your quality of life in the future. And all of this boils down to making more and more stress in your life than there should be. And with 36% of all divorces can be attributed to some sort of financial issues, this is something that you want to take seriously. Because when you're low on excess cash, you start to question every purchase the other person makes, and this causes everyone to be on edge every day, which is not a good thing for your family. And the problem isn't the fact that your spouse bought that Starbucks before asking you. The real issue is the fact that you're maxed out on all your expenses because your monthly payment is so high that it's causing you to argue over a $6 Starbucks coffee. But I can guarantee that if you had more of a spread between your income and your monthly expenses, that you would not care about that $6 coffee that your wife bought without checking with you first in your budget. And I would argue that you'd be happier and have a better quality of life if you bought a house that took up a smaller portion of your budget. Because then you would have more money to take your family out on more vacations, save up an emergency fund as well as retirement, as well as get your wife that Starbucks coffee every morning that she deserves. And to all my ladies out there, how nice would it be to get a Starbucks every morning without your husband mentioning something about its cost? And to all my guys out there, have you ever seen your wife mad while holding a Starbucks cup? I didn't think so. Thus, based on some simple math, small house payment equals more Starbucks. More Starbucks equals happier wife. Happier wife equals happier life. Now compare that to maxing out your house payment to the point where you can't even afford to take a vacation every year, or being able to afford a coffee without it triggering an argument. Thus, to avoid this money trap, I recommend keeping your monthly house payment to be below 20% of your total household income. This will ensure that you have some breathing room that you can buy things that will improve your quality of life, as well as have some money left over to invest. So if you make $5,000 a month, you're going to want to strive to make sure that your monthly payment for your house is below $1,000 a month. So with today's high interest rates of about 6%, that would equate to about a $170,000 home loan for every $5,000 of income. So if you make $10,000 a month, you can get up to a $340,000 loan and still follow this rule. If you make $15,000 a month, you can get up to a $510,000 loan. And with interest rates changing nowadays on a monthly basis, these loan numbers can change depending on the day you watch this video. So big picture, make sure that your monthly payment for your house is below 20% of your monthly income. That way you can ensure that your house brings your family happiness as opposed to stress. Now, money trap number 3 to avoid in your 30s is not having life insurance. Now, nobody likes to talk about death, but it's a reality of life, and the truth is none of us are going to be able to avoid it entirely. The best we can do is prolong it. And I'm sure we all know of a family that may have lost someone unexpectedly and weren't able to come up with the funds for the funeral and had to rely primarily on donations. Not to mention the financial impact that losing a source of income can have on a family, especially if the other spouse stayed at home to watch the kids. And all of this financial stress is horrible to go through when you add it on top of the emotional stress that comes with losing someone you love. And it's all very sad to witness the financial destruction that happens after the funeral, especially when you know that it could have all been avoided if they had the right life insurance policy in place to take care of the family. So how can we go about avoiding this money trap in our 30s? Consider the fact that the average funeral today costs about $12,000. So if you're young and you don't have any kids or a spouse or someone that's depending on your income, it's not the end of the world if you don't have a life insurance policy in place, as long as you have the funds to pay for your own funeral. But where life insurance does play a key role is whenever you do have someone that depends on your income, such as your spouse, your kids, or even your dog. A good rule of thumb that you can use to determine what's the safe amount of life insurance you should have is 10 times your annual income plus enough to cover any additional debt that you may have. For example, if you owe $300,000 on a house and you make $50,000 a year, you want $300,000 to pay off the home loan plus an additional $50,000 a year for 10 years for a total of $800,000. You can also consider adding any financial goals that you have for your dependents, such as college, cost of weddings, and quinceañeras. And the reason this rule of thumb is good is because it allows you to pay off any debts and sustain their current standard of living, as well as the standard of living for the years to come until your kids are old enough to be on their own. Because the primary purpose of life insurance is to be able to preserve your family's standard of living if ever your income went missing. Because I've seen examples of people that had kids and a spouse just get enough insurance to be able to pay for the funeral when they were the primary breadwinner. And although the funeral was covered, the family ended up losing the house down the road because the monthly payment was too much for the other spouse to cover on their own. But if you make sure that you have at least enough to cover all your debts, this will prevent your family from losing things like your home. And if you get enough insurance to also cover 10 years of your income, it will be enough to ensure that your family's lifestyle is preserved until the kids are old enough to be on their own. And you can adjust the amount of years being covered based on the age of your kids. For example, if you have a newborn, you might want to consider getting 18 years of your income being covered. But if your youngest kid is 10 years old, then maybe you only need 8 years of your income to be covered. It all comes down to what you feel is enough to preserve your family's standard of living until everyone get out on their own. Now, there are two main types of life insurance. There's term life insurance, and then there's whole life insurance. And there's a lot of debate on which is better in terms of if you should get a whole life insurance policy or a term life insurance policy. Term life insurance is much cheaper, usually costing about $25 a month for a $1 million policy, since you are renting the policy for a set period of time. Whole life insurance is much more expensive, upwards of $1,000 a month, but it covers you your entire life. As you can see from this chart, the average whole life insurance policy increases in cost the older you get, with it costing $2,101 a month in your 50s to maintain a $1 million policy. But you have to remember that a whole life insurance policy is a business, not a charity, which means they are making money off of your payments each month. And since it's a whole life insurance policy, that means they will have to pay you eventually, since everyone has a 100% chance of dying at some point in their lives. So they have to be able to afford to pay out your policy amount as well as make a profit. What they are doing is taking your monthly payment and investing in various funds that make 10% a year. And they are setting aside about 5% to have money in your policy when you pass, and then make a profit on the other 5% until your policy is paid in full, and then anything left over is just profit for them. So a smarter way to cut out the middleman and have the best of both worlds is to get the term life insurance that is $25 a month until your kids are of working age, and invest the difference in cost of what a whole life insurance policy would charge you. For example, let's use some easy numbers of $1,000 a month, which we saw that it costs much more in a whole life insurance policy when you're investing in your 50s. And let's say you put that money in a basic mutual fund or an ETF earning 10% starting at age 30, and you let it grow to the average American lifespan of 79 years. Your $1,000 a month would have made you $13,363,440. But if you use that same money in a $1 million whole life insurance policy, you would have only gotten $1 million when you died. And the whole insurance company would have gotten the other $12 million in profit. So using this strategy of having both term life insurance policy and investing in the difference in what a whole life insurance policy would cover, you would allow your family to be safe in the younger years with a cheap term life insurance policy, as well as in your older years by the nest egg that you created yourself with the same amount of money invested in your own account, but a much bigger outcome in the end. This method makes it much more affordable to be able to be covered so you don't fall for this money trap. Now, money trap number 4 to avoid in your 30s is having one source of income per household. Now, this money trap can be considered either having just one source of income or depending on the highest source of income in order to cover all the bills. Because living on one source of income or the highest source of income is fine when everything is going right. But as we saw in the 2020 shutdown, things can go south really quickly. And if you're depending on the highest source of income or just one source of income to pay for all your bills, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. Because with so many people losing their jobs in 2020, many families were faced with evictions or foreclosures because the average American today doesn't even have $1,000 in savings. So to avoid this money trap, if you and your spouse work, aim to live on the lowest source of income. Or if you're single or if you have a spouse that stays at home to watch the kids, aim to produce a second source of income that's going to be able to cover the necessities outside of your normal everyday job. And this could be done many ways, such as having a side gig, owning a side business, buying rental properties that produce cash flow, but whatever it is, just make sure that it produces enough cash flow each month to pay for all the necessities. And self-made millionaires know the importance of not depending on just one stream of income, with 65% of all self-made millionaires having 3 sources of income and 45% of them having 4 sources of income. By doing this, you're going to keep yourself and your family safe from the unexpected job loss. And it's also going to relieve a lot of stress knowing that you're not depending on one source of income to pay the bills. Not to mention, if you're not depending on any one source of income, it's going to give you more power to not stay in a toxic work environment if you don't have to. And the importance of avoiding this money trap can be summed up in a great quote I heard years ago, and that is, never let one person determine if your family eats or not. And by producing multiple sources of income, you can ensure that you have the power to do this.
Take it, Kronk. Feel the power.
Oh, I could feel it.
Now, money trap number 5 to avoid in your 30s, that is spending on things you like versus things you love. I think we can all relate to this at some point where you get invited to go on a cruise with your buddies, but the ticket is $1,000 and you don't have the money, so you can't go. It sucks because you would have loved to have gone, but instead you are forced to stick to just see all their photos and posts on how much fun they're having, as well as watching their Facebook Live videos from your phone. Meanwhile, you realize that you bought your newest iPhone Pro just because you liked it for the same amount of money. So in reality, you did have the $1,000 for the trip, but you chose to buy the phone you liked instead of going on the trip you would have loved. And many people don't truly realize how much they're sacrificing whenever they buy high-priced consumer items. For example, say you like to go shopping for the newest clothes and watches every month and you spend just $200 a month on this pleasure. Now that would cost you the equivalent of great seats to see a band that you love each month, or a really nice dinner with your spouse each month testing out new foods and wine. Now take it to another level, which is much more common. Say you're a person that likes to always have a new car instead of keeping your older paid-off vehicles. Now say the car payment is $500 a month, which equals $6,000 a year for having a car that you like. Now I also realize that the average cost for an all-expense trip to Hawaii per week for 2 people is $3,839. Or the fact that a coworker of mine was able to take their spouse to Rome, Italy for 2 weeks and it cost them under $5,500 to do it with a tour guide. So in essence, if you could afford a $500 car payment, you could also afford to go to Hawaii or Rome for nearly 2 weeks a year, every year. And these are just a few examples. Now think of some things that you're spending money on that may not bring you that much happiness. And calculate if you give those up, could those be replaced by things that you would love doing? Now think 20 years from now, what would give you the most happiness and fulfillment looking back in your 30s? The experiences, the trips, and the adventures that you went on with your family and your friends? Or the newest iPhone and Gucci belt that you bought? Only you can answer that. Because I know some of us really love the Gucci sandals. But as long as you can decide ahead of time that Gucci sandals will bring you more happiness long term than anything else, then go for it. And I don't know about you, but I would rather be barefoot on a beach than wearing Gucci sandals in my living room, but that's just me. So to avoid this money trap, take some time to figure out what are the things that you like spending money on, and seeing if you lower them, would you be able to afford more of the things that you loved? Well, that's it, you guys, on this video on the top 5 money traps to avoid in your 30s. Now, as you can see, in your 30s, there's a lot of financial traps that you should avoid. But hopefully you learned something in this video that you can apply in your own life. That way you can ensure that you're living a glamorous, bougie, and financially stress-free life in your 30s. If you got any value from this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up button and comment down below any of your experiences with any of these money traps, or if any money traps that you've went through that we didn't mention. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss out on our next video of money traps to avoid when you're getting ready to retire. And if you haven't seen my past video on the top 5 money traps to avoid in your 20s, make sure to check that one out as well, because this entire video series just builds off of that. And with that, you guys are my 2 cents that I invest in you, that I hope continues to compound over time until we're all financially free. So until next time, Simon says, do as I say, and have a great day. Thank you.